Russia and Taiwan. Not two countries you would think of as having many historical connections, but in fact, there are quite a few fascinating stories, and we've told some of them on Formosa Files. So let's see, we had Season 3, Episode 30, the Nationalist Air Force, the KMT Air Force bombing attack on Taihoku, Japanese Taipei, Japanese-controlled Taiwan in 1938. This involved Soviet pilots in Soviet planes, disguised to look like ROC Air Force planes. And we had Season 3, Episode 27, when Taiwan, or the ROC, blockaded China, or the PRC. And that was when we told the story of the capture of the tanker Tuapse in 1954. A civilian Soviet ship was captured and confiscated by the Republic of China Navy. The sailors were detained in Taiwan for various periods, a few not released for over 30 years. Some of them stayed here until 1988. So, those are not super happy stories connected to Russia for the most part, but today we have something a little bit more, adventurous.
It does end in death.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay. Anyway, most Russian stories do, though, right? I mean, think about
Absolutely.
it. Okay, so imagine a young Indiana Jones type figure, and this would be from the greater Russia area, visiting Taiwan in the year 1875.
The Taiwan History Podcast, Formosa Files, is made possible through the generous sponsorship of the Frank C. Chen Foundation. Formosa Files.
So we're going back to Qing era Taiwan, 1875 to be exact, when Taiwan was a prefecture of Fujian Province. John, fair to say, kind of loosely governed by the Qing at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the winter of 1875, a 22-year-old Russian naval officer, so again, 22 years old, embarks alone on a dangerous and adventurous journey on foot through Taiwan. Okay, so an obvious question. 22 years old, alone, Russian. Was he a spy?
Partly. He was not a trained intelligence-gathering officer, and he had a genuine anthropological interest, a personal anthropological interest. He came here to look at the indigenous people. But yeah, simply by visiting and observing the lay of the land, his trip would be very much of benefit to the Russian state intelligence-wise. So yeah, quasi-spy, semi-spy.
This is Taiwan under Qing rule, at least much of the island. The mountains were the domain of the indigenous people, the Aborigines.
And Russia was under the rule of Tsar Alexander II.
Ah, yes. Thank you, sir. That was the guy who sold Alaska to the Americans in 1867 for pocket change.
Before they discovered gold there, yeah. So they've lost territory there, but Russia is rapidly expanding. It's a rapidly expanding empire, especially into Central Asia.
Yeah, they'd taken Chinese territory. Well, they'd forced Qing China to cede large territories in the northeast. China was busy putting down the Taiping Rebellion and also embroiled in the Second Opium War.
Mm-hmm. Russia now had a presence in the Pacific Ocean. And, even in faraway New Zealand, there were various scares of Russian invasions. We built fortifications, artillery defenses, gun emplacements. This was to protect New Zealand's coastal cities from Russian attack from the sea.
That's wild.
Mm-hmm.
So far away. They wanted your Kiwis or something? What was it?
Wanted the women, of course.
Right. Okay, enough about New Zealand or other obscure side stories. We got to tell the story of, I'm not good with Russian names, but this should be Pavel Ivanovich Ibis or Ibis? Ibis. Okay, we looked up the pronunciation and we think it's Ibis. So Paul Ibis. Pavel is the Russian form of the English name Paul. So our Russian man is actually an Estonian, and we do not mean any disrespect to Estonians, who probably at this point do not consider themselves Russian by and large. But back when he was born, June 16th, 1852, Estonia was willingly or not part of the Russian Empire.
Mm-hmm. He was born to a peasant family and as a young teenager went to naval college. He rose to the position of warrant officer. That's a mid-level officer. He took part in the global voyage of the Russian warship Askold. That was from 1872 to 1876.
He took advantage of a 6-week break during his ship's repairs in Hong Kong in early 1875 to travel to Taiwan. Taiwan's southern Hengchun Peninsula up to northern Danshui, along the island's western coast. Ibis provided objective and detailed records of some of Taiwan's ethnic groups, including the Paiwan, Amis, Rukai, Puyama, Bunun, Plains indigenous groups, and Hakka and Han Chinese. He died on April 18th, 1877 in Italy, not quite 25 years of age, but that's clearly getting ahead of our story.
Right, so he's in Hong Kong. He's been sailing around the world for over 2 years and still keen for travel. He wants to investigate the indigenous people on the island of Formosa.
He must have sold it to his superiors as military surveillance, but he obviously had, as you noted earlier, a genuine interest in what we'd call anthropology.
Yeah, he was self-taught on the subject, very admirable. From his Taiwan trip, he wrote several reports and articles, and despite his youth, his lack of academic training, and his short time in Taiwan, his writings are still valuable.
Why did he get permission from his naval bosses for a trip to Taiwan? Well, Formosa was of special interest to Russia and other imperial powers at that time. The Japanese had sent a punitive expedition the year before, 1874. Punitive as in punishment for the Mudan incident, 1871. And if you recall, the Mudan incident was the massacre of 54, what we call today Okinawa, but was once an independent kingdom, Ryukyu sailors. So 54 of them were killed, both sailors and passengers, after their ship shipwrecked off of Taiwan's southeastern coast.
The Japanese 1874 expedition was actually an occupation, a partial colonization. They stayed almost 6 months in the southernmost, the southeastern area of Taiwan. Militarily, it was a success, but a lot of soldiers died from malaria. And the government got pushback from the colonial powers.
On January 21st, 1875, Ibis arrived in Takao, Kaohsiung, from Hong Kong. Over the next month and a half, he traversed the entire island on foot, first traveling south from Takao and visiting Fenggang, Cecheng, Shimen, and other places. He then returned to Kaohsiung and traveled north along the western coast, passing through Tainan, Jiayi, Jianghua, and then up to Taipei and Geelong.
During his travels, Ibis sought answers to questions about the origins and racial types of Formosa's indigenous people.
He traveled on foot south from Kaohsiung with 2 Chinese Christian porters, arranged by a missionary called Ritchie, and spent a night in Donggang. From there, he keeps heading south down to the western coastal area of Pingdong County, and he's a fan. He paints a beautiful picture of the area. Here's what he said, quote, "The lowlands of southern Formosa were dotted with charming villages, making this one of the most beautiful places I'd ever seen. These villages were completely hidden under dense shade of towering bamboo groves, with betel nut and banana trees surrounding clean, well-kept houses. Rather than the dwellings of laborers, these villages looked more like clusters of holiday cottages."
Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he's been cooped up with fellow sailors in a cabin on a ship for a couple of years.
But it's interesting that he brings up the shade of the bamboo groves.
Absolutely. Between these villages, he went through, quote, a beautiful and vibrant landscape. People were busy working everywhere, harvesting sugarcane, transplanting rice seedlings, and preparing the fields, end quote. The only criticism he has is for the ox carts, quote, "Heavy carts move slowly along the roads, their wheels ungreased, producing a terrible piercing screech."
I wonder if he suffered from, misophonia?
I don't know that. What's that?
Where you get really irritated by a particular sound, like people chewing or chalkboards.
Okay.
So and he can't stand it. Well, ox carts aside, he says people here seemed more content, happy, and cheerful than those in the cities. Yeah, I think that continues to this day. He also says there was no shocking poverty or hardship to be seen, nor were there ruffians or coarse manners to offend. Honesty and hospitality left the fondest impressions.
He has good words for both the Han Chinese, that is the Taiwanese settlers, and of the lowland Aborigines. Of the Chinese, he says they were entirely different from those at the trading ports. The Han merchants at commercial harbors seem to be afflicted with a feverish obsession with making money, he says, and sometimes the arrogance of Europeans only exacerbated their coarseness and rudeness.
Quite an insightful guy. He also writes he had a change of heart about the Chinese. They changed his preconceptions. Quote, I felt ashamed for having harbored prejudice and suspicion toward the rural residents here. Everywhere I went, I was met with sincere and warm hospitality. When I left, the only way I could repay their kindness was with small gifts. They absolutely refused to accept money. My belongings were always left out in the open, even when I was away for several days, yet nothing was ever stolen.
Impressive. There are interesting passages in his written accounts about meeting with village leaders, presenting them with gifts, alcohol, gunpowder, and various small things. Smoking and eating betel nut was quite popular, he says, among both men and women, and a big part of socializing.
Before entering one village, though, Paul Ibis was faced with a challenge. He had to shoot a bullet from his pistol into a bamboo stick from the distance of 30 paces, a task with which he was successful, and it won him, yay, respect from people. Good shot.
As he heads south, he's moving into the Pingpu peoples, the lowland indigenous peoples, and our 22-year-old traveler is incredibly observant. He details the buildings and people, makes sketches, and records some words of local languages.
In one village, for example, he notes that the women, quote, were all dressed like Han Chinese, wearing loose white trousers and short-sleeved blue tops with slits on both sides. The hair is combed smoothly and tied back, decorated with red ribbons and large yellow beads wrapped around the whole head. Some women wear about 10 thin metal rings on their hands or more, with many rings on their fingers.
And this detail applies to other things too. He describes some weapons they have. He says, quote, 2-foot-long wooden-handled fixed knife, 10-foot-long bamboo pole with a 6 or 9-inch sharp blade, a simple bow made of tough wood with a leather bowstring and iron arrows, bamboo arrows, a matchlock gun. The barrel of the matchlock is 4 feet long. The butt is only 1 foot. The ammunition was Chinese crude gunpowder mixed with, blah, blah, blah. He goes on to describe the gunpowder holder, how it's carried. Incredible detail.
This seems like a spy to me.
Okay. He's quite observant, isn't he?
If nothing else, yeah. On the way, he met an official riding in a sedan, a car, accompanied by about 70 soldiers armed with spears. These are actually halberds, is that right?
No, different things. So spear's one thing, halberd is a different weapon.
Okay. Halberds. Okay, that is a pole, right, with an axe and a spike at the end?
Yep.
And he also saw various other weapons that he saw as backward, and he wasn't that impressed because he has a revolver and a rifle or, a shotgun.
Yeah, there were some dangers, and at various times on his journey, he couldn't find guides or porters. They were too scared. And on one occasion, he had to pull out his revolver, but all was well. No shots fired.
In some places, the local people assumed, not without valid reason, that he was a missionary. But as he got close to the area of the Mudan incident, of where the Japanese expedition of the previous year had been, this changed. He says of the Chinese villagers, quote, they regarded me as a Japanese and screamed, Japan, Japan! Most residents had never seen foreigners, so I was treated as a Japanese everywhere, which is a bit bizarre.
Yes.
I'm assuming...
He's not complaining about it. He said the misunderstanding worked to his advantage. He says it kept him safe because nobody wanted to offend the Japanese.
The Qing officials, though, they didn't want foreigners having incidents with Aborigines. So some of this young Russian's travels were secret, which he thought was reasonable. He writes, quote, this is understandable. After all, they are responsible for any troubles related to foreigners that occur within their jurisdiction. And again, who knows? He could have been a spy.
As Ibis travels, he's recording words, drawing sketches, portraits mostly, and he also wanted to take body measurements. Anthropology at this time included taking skull measurements and such. But he had trouble with this. Of one encounter, he writes, quote, "My iron bent leg frightened him, and he ran away as soon as he could."
Iron bent leg.
I'm giving you a flavor of Google Translate because this text, it was, me using Google Translate mostly from an excellent Chinese language book, translated from the original Russian. Iron bent leg means calipers. Calipers, a tool for measuring the width of something, in this case, skulls.
After visiting the Hengchun Peninsula in the far south, he headed to Wanluan Township in Pingdong County. Then, as now, the highlight there is the magnificent Wanjing Catholic Basilica.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, it's a beautiful whitewashed Spanish fortress-style building set against the green-blue hills. Lovely building and setting. He found the residents, the Pingpu people, the civilized indigenous, you might say, hardworking, cheerful, and carefree. And most of them were Catholic. In that village, he stayed in a comfortable house of the Catholic mission. The Spanish Dominican father had been in Taiwan for 12 years and was a gracious host, very happy to see a fellow European.
And again, Pavel has kind words for rural Pingdong. Quote, "It's hard to imagine a more charming place than the area. Green farms alternate with bamboo groves or villages surrounded by curling palms, banana trees, and fruit trees. These trees are especially beautiful against the backdrop of the mountain vistas, whose outlines are particularly distinct against the cloudless blue sky."
Ibis went to investigate the Aborigines in the mountains east of Wanjin, and once again, he gives very detailed descriptions of the people. He had an artist's eye. He was an artist, and he details the jewelry, the tattoos and such, hairstyles, and clothing.
Ibis returned to Takao and then headed north to Taiwan-Fu, then the capital, now called Tainan, of course.
He says the route was monotonous and boring. Quote, "Sugar is grown almost everywhere, and large villages are often encountered, but they are neither beautiful nor clean."
Oh, okay. So more of a Kaohsiung Pingdong guy, huh? I like him.
Huh.
He says, according to Chinese data, Tainan City has 220,000 residents. And then he writes, quote, "However, this number seems to be exaggerated. The British consul here believes that the population is only 70,000. The town is surrounded by a thick brick wall with a circumference of about 4 miles and has 8 city gates with towers on them. At 8 p.m., the gates close. And a little later, all the streets are separated by gates, several gates along a long street. This is beneficial to police management, but is very inconvenient for residents."
That's a fascinating detail. Street gates. We're all familiar with city gates, but there were also sometimes internal gates along roads.
Yeah, just ways of keeping control of certain areas, I guess. Interesting. I've never seen a remains of one, though.
Likewise.
On the 2nd of February, he left Tainan and headed east into the foothills. This was Chinese New Year, and he saw festivities. Quote, "We often encounter parades playing music and singing, which are vivid and lively. People dress up happily, walk in the fields, or sit on the graves of their ancestors." I don't know if you got that right.
No, this doesn't sound
grave sitting. We don't have grave sitting festival that I'm aware of. He says firecrackers are set off in front of the temple at night. That checks out. And people are coming and going in the temple. Some are talking, some are smoking, and some are chewing betel nut.
A very casual attitude to the local temple, something of a community center. Yes.
Yeah.
But importantly, his next stop was Chiayi City, of which he says, quote, "This is a quite beautiful town located near the mountains with 10,000 residents. The roads are clean and even wider than those in ordinary Chinese cities. There are many temples here, some of which are not big, but are beautifully built."
Do you find the roads in your Chiayi wider than usual?
No.
All right. All things change. Yeah. He planned to visit the Thao tribe, one of Taiwan's smallest groups who live at Sun Moon Lake, but he was unable to because, quote, "of the cowardice of the Han people. Although this tribe is not dangerous at all, I could not find a guide in Chiayi or on the way to Zhanghua."
And so he had no choice but to continue on to Zhanghua. He visited some Aboriginal villages in the hills. He would like to have gone to Nantou County, but he was running short of time. He had a ship to catch up in Danshui. He traveled overland from central Taiwan up to Taipei, and he says much of the journey was monotonous and the farmland poorer than what he'd seen in the south.
Again, I'm liking his pro-Southern attitude. It's working for me. He writes, quote, I traveled about 20 miles a day, sometimes more, and 5 days later, so February 19th, arrived at Dadaochen in Taipei. Oh, and now he's really making me happy. It rained constantly, he writes, and in some places you had to cross overflowing rivers, walk in waist-deep water, and sleep in disgusting places. Opium dens with poor roofs that sometimes provided no protection from the rain. My porter became ill because he was not used to the cold and wet, and it took me a while to find 2 other people to help him.
Ibis was planning to take the steamer Hailong Sea Dragon to Hong Kong. The boat had not arrived at Danshui yet. It was behind schedule, and it was thought that the ship would arrive in 5 or 6 days. So our Russian could have rested. After all, he was tired and he'd experienced a few fevers. But no, he wanted to go exploring. So he decided, I'll go see the port of Geelong and look at the local coal mines there.
Again, coal, useful for spies as well.
You're a very suspicious person.
Very. So how is he going to get to Geelong? Overland trail, coastal trail, sail? Nope. He picks river, the Geelong River, which is actually, you think it makes sense, but it's tough because the river flows from the mountains near Geelong westward to the Danshui River. A special flat boat was used, a boat equipped with sails, oars, and these long poles for pushing and propping.
Poling a craft up a river, that's damn hard work.
Yeah, but at least this boat was quite spacious, had a roof, keep you dry from the rain. So, as we said, this going up the Geelong River isn't all that easy, and as the evening came, they were still there, fighting their way up the river, so they docked riverside and waited for dawn.
Yeah, a fire was set up in the boat for cooking. There was rice, onions, pork, and tea, and the men happily shared their meal, their stir-fry, with our Russian friend. They spent a cold night on the boat, but as soon as dawn broke, they continued upriver, and after a couple of hours, they reached a point from where he had to climb a ridge of about 1,000 feet.
Okay, first to fight your way up a river and then climb 1,000 feet. Guy's got energy. But it seems to have been worth it for him because he writes, from the mountain, you can have a magnificent view of Geelong Harbor. Overall, the harbor reminds me of the harbor in Nagasaki, only shorter and, in my opinion, prettier.
I think because of the hard work to get that view, Nagasaki is one of the most beautiful views I've ever seen. He visited the customs supervisor in Geelong. He had a letter of introduction. This customs guy was a Russian and had been living in Geelong for several years. Ibis writes, quote, he used meteorological observations as a pastime and published his results every year. This is currently the only weather station in Formosa.
And the easiest possible one to make predictions at.
Aha.
He's in Geelong and making weather observations. Today was rain, tomorrow was rain, next day is rain. That's my German, yeah. Anyway, rain.
Yeah, actually, I don't want us to be so predictable. Every time we mention Geelong, we talk about the rain. So I left out a passage in his account where it actually been raining continuously for the week before he arrived. But he was lucky. He had good weather the day he arrived.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. We got to be nice to Geelong. Actually, it really is a pretty little town.
Absolutely. So yeah, there's a Russian guy living there in the 1870s. Ibis doesn't give a name in his account, but this Russian I checked is Nikolai Titsukin. Apologies for that. Nikolai Titsukin, who had previously served in Peking.
This Russian guy was probably the first Russian resident in Taiwan. He was in the Chinese Maritime Customs Service, so in the employ of China, but this maritime customs was staffed by Westerners, mostly Brits, but also Germans, French, and so on, Russian.
First living resident. Maybe. But he was not the first permanent resident, so to speak.
You're confusing me.
You remember that episode we did on the flamboyant Count Maurice Benyovsky, who claimed to have had amazing adventures here in 1771?
Yeah, I do remember the alliteration of the episode title. A cunning count contemplates colonizing Formosa.
So this count, this Polish, Slovakian, Hungarian semi-nobleman, had been imprisoned in Siberia, but with fellow prisoners seized a Russian sailing ship and they headed south. During their time here in Taiwan, 3 Russian crew members died in clashes with the indigenous people and buried here. I think the first Russian, so to speak, to take up permanent residence.
Oh, I see. By being buried in Taiwanese soil.
Mm-hmm.
Back in Geelong, word comes from Taipei that night. A courier from Taipei reports that steamer you were talking about, the Sea Dragon, has arrived in Danshui and is leaving tomorrow. So he's got to get out of Geelong as soon as possible or he's going to miss the ship.
As luck would have it, a modern Chinese gunboat, the Fujian, was at dawn going to Danshui. And the young captain, quote, a kindly officer and a brave seaman, was happy to give me a ride.
As a naval officer himself, Ibis was intrigued by this up-close look at another naval craft. And he thought it wasn't exactly ship-shape. It should have been cleaner, he thought. Quote, the lack of discipline on the ship was evident. Sailors and officers sat and smoked on the quarterdeck. The beds on the living deck were not made up during the day, and people who were on duty slept and smoked on the beds. They are talkative and noisy at work, although they do things quickly and dexterously. But what really impressed him was this one particular aspect. He was surprised to find that, quote, most of the officers spoke English, and many even spoke it quite fluently.
Astonishing.
It is. So he made it to Danshui and hopped on the Sea Dragon. A couple days later, he's in Hong Kong. He gets to rejoin his ship for the last legs of its round-the-world voyage.
But Ibis, who had experienced some fevers in Taiwan, would suffer from a mystery illness. He never made it home. He left the ship for treatment and went to Austria and then Italy, passing away from an unknown illness on April 18th, 1877, not quite yet 25 years old. In his 2 years following his Taiwan adventures, he wrote several articles and a report, which we've drawn on for this episode.
Well, a short life, but an interesting life. And to contrast, John, with the people of today who come to Taiwan maybe as a YouTuber or something and very superficially check out Cho Tofu or this, that. He was looking deeply at Taiwan, traveling outside of big urban areas, actually doing some real traveling.
Yeah. Grappling with intellectual questions and doing the hard yards, literally walking through Taiwan. Yes, much more admirable than the modern equivalent of some YouTuber.
We're not criticizing all of you, just some of you. Anyway, any final thoughts?
We've run out of time, but we can cover a few other things in a bits and pieces episode.
Sounds good. All right, thanks for listening, and we will put up some of the sketches that he made on our website as soon as we can. 谢谢. I'm Eric Michael Smith.
I'm John Ross. Bye.